Good morning. Thanks for coming. I'm super happy to have a non-zero set of attendees today. Really wasn't sure anyone was going to be interested in the non-technical stuff, but I appreciate it because I feel pretty strongly about this kind of stuff. So thanks for coming out. I'm legally obligated to tell you about myself, even though it's boring. But my name is Stuart Gripman. I've been at this for about 20 years. I've had the privilege of co-authoring a few books with the great Susan Allred-Prosser. And currently, I'm an in-house developer for a company called DriveSavers Data Recovery. But that's really only been about 25% of my career. The majority of it has been as the owner of a company called Crooked Arm Consulting. And we were just a contract development house. And so most of what I've learned and am drawing from for this presentation comes from that experience. But this material really does apply to folks who are in-house or contract. The difference is, if you're a contract developer, all this is a lot harder and the stakes are higher. So good for you. Sorry. All right. So a couple of ground rules. This guy here, his name is Machiavelli. Everyone knows who he is, right? He's become a byword for manipulation and power and control. And don't be like this guy, okay? What we're going to be talking about today is about assessing the personalities and the roles of people with whom you're interacting in a development setting. And I'm going to give you, some of my techniques for encouraging these folks to make positive contributions and, if necessary, trying to isolate people who are being detractors, being problematic, and harming the project, okay? And yes, this is a form of manipulation. You can't lie about that, right? But it's not about power and control, okay? We're going to be more like the guy who wrote this book. Mahan Khalsa wrote an excellent book called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. And although it's mostly about sales, one of the main themes really applies to us as developers, which is if you're going to have the best outcomes and you're going to have the best experiences, you need to be in this for the success of the client or the success of the company who has employed you as an in-house developer. If you just care about showing off your technical prowess, if you just care about getting attention and adulation, if you just care about making money, you're in the wrong career. But if those are your motivations, you're not going to have the best outcomes. So you've got to come at this from a place where you genuinely care about doing a good job and delivering what is being asked of you. And the fact is, and you probably already know this, but if you do that, if you make the people who are paying you look good, it's going to make you look good, and you're going to have good outcomes. So we're going to learn some manipulation, but we're going to do it for all the right reasons. Okay. Or you might want to be like this guy. This handsome devil here is my father. And when I was growing up, he would constantly say to me, what would he say? Sorry, Dad, I wasn't listening. I don't care what you're doing. It always involves people. And it took me longer than I care to admit to really understand what he was going on about, because in the surface of it, it just seemed like a weird thing to say. But technology projects, tech is maybe half of any given development project, right? Much of the rest is managing personalities, managing people, understanding motivations, dealing with humans. It always involves people. So you can't just box yourself up and say, well, I'm a great tech, and that's going to be it. It's going to cause you problems in the end. So we're going to start by caring about the client's needs. We're going to mix in some of the info and ideas from this talk, and hopefully it's going to improve outcomes. And I hope also improve sort of your satisfaction, your own job satisfaction and sense of accomplishment. So most important, personalities matter, and you will ignore office politics at your peril, okay? You really need to know who supports your project. You really need to know who's against your project, who is not on board and possibly working against it. And the main reason I see is that developers, particularly contract developers, are very convenient scapegoats, right? If it all goes to hell, everyone in the company can say, well, this developer didn't know what he was doing, and it's that guy's fault, even if it's not, okay? Early in my career, back in the 90s, back before you kids were born, I did some work for a company called Leapfrog. They make kids' toys, right? And I was in an early meeting. We were figuring out, what kind of changes they wanted to their system. And it was me and about 4 employees of the company. And at one point, one of the folks there said, just talked about some feature she wanted. I don't even remember what it is, but she said, we really should be doing X with this system. And one of her colleagues said, well, if you're going to do that, you better talk to Dick Swearingen. And at that moment, I dropped a huge opportunity because I leaned back in my chair, and I'm not kidding, I daydreamed, and I thought, I'm so happy. I'm an independent developer now. I don't have to worry about their petty office politics. They can squabble, and it doesn't affect me. You're probably not surprised to learn that I did not have that contract for very long. And whether or not it was because Dick Swearingen was against it or not, I'll never know because I wasn't paying attention to the dynamic in the room, and I willfully ignored useful information. Now, from that time, Leapfrog grew to be a pretty big company, and there could have been a lot in it there for me, and that was just lost. That was just lost because I wasn't paying attention. Okay, so what we're going to do is I made this silly personality matrix thing. I made this awesome personality matrix thing, and I'm going to kind of rip through this pretty quickly because I want to get to the meat of how do we figure out who's who and how do we deal with them. Okay, but I think this is important because these are the types of roles and personalities that I've come across the most in my development career. I'm not saying you're going to see this in every single job that you do. I'm also not saying I've figured out every personality out there, but this is like I think 8 of the most common. So I'm just going to name them and define them at this point, and then we'll get into how to deal with them in the next section. Okay, so, and I forgot to tell you how it works. In the vertical axis, the higher the person appears in the matrix, the higher the role appears in the matrix, the more interaction you're likely to have with them, the more you're going to have to manage that person. The lower they are, the more hands-off you can probably be. And then there's a potential impact from left to right. So if they're over here on the left side, they can potentially do a lot of damage to your project. If they're over on the right side, you manage them well, they can really make fundamental contributions to the success of your project. So up means more hands-on, down means less, left means bad, right means good. All right, our begrudging worker is our first personality type. Okay, this person is change averse, but they're going to go along with it, right? They tend to be like a rank and file user who they're going to do what they have to do, but they're not going to be happy about it, and kind of an Eeyore character. And they usually lack the clout to sort of cause you problems. So you just have to kind of live with them, and they're going to live with you, and hopefully it's all going to be fine. They can't really do a whole lot of damage. The inverse of that, I think, is the invested worker. This is someone with a similar rank in the organization, but they recognize the benefits of what you're doing. They recognize that this project can help them and their organization, so they're willing to help. So an invested worker can be a great asset, particularly when you need things tested, right? This is the kind of person who's eager to, yeah, I'll try that out. I'll take some of my time to work on this. A disparager is somebody who, unlike a begrudging worker who's going to go along with it, this is a vocal detractor, and this is the person you really need to manage and contain. They'll participate in the process, but they're rarely going to have positive contributions. And it can be tempting, but it's, I think, ultimately foolish to ignore a disparager, because often they have really good information. They're just not good at relating it, or they're not, they don't have people skills, or just don't come from a constructive point of view. So you've got to listen to them, but we'll get into more of that in a bit. Okay, the seer, I love this. Don't see this a whole lot, but the person I call the seer is somebody who's invested in the process, and they have this ability to see the implications of design and data decisions pretty far out. And they're excited about sharing that information with you and sharing the things that they can envision. So that's great. That's a fantastic asset, but it requires more management from you because sometimes you've got to rein that in. I love seers, but I'm often saying, in the next version, that's going to be awesome, but we don't have time, we don't have scope. So cultivate your seers, but rein them in. Okay, the manager. This is the only one where I didn't color code it as good or bad because a manager can really go either way. And for the purposes of this discussion, I'm saying a manager is somebody who oversees the rank and file users of the system. If you're not really sure who's the manager, figure out who's asking for the most reports. That's your manager. And it can go either way. A good manager can inspire the participation and engagement from the people who report to her. A less good manager is going to either be disengaged or worse, try to coerce cooperation, and that can be very damaging. So that's why I put the manager square in the middle. You're going to have to figure it out case by case where a given manager in your project stands and deal with them accordingly. The money. Okay, I'm not talking about the person necessarily who signs the checks. I'm talking about the person who does disbursement. And if you're a contract developer, this is the person who's looking at your invoices when you send them. Okay, money is a very obvious reason why you want to have a good relationship with the money, because they're going to attend to your invoices and pay them right away. But another reason that is not always very obvious is these folks tend to be very well connected within their organizations. Okay, so if you've got a good relationship with the disbursement person who knows all the personalities in the place, that can be a good source of advice or insight. When you're having trouble with Department X, you can, say, hey, do you know why Jeff is not returning my emails? Is he on vacation? And then she'll be like, Jeff's a jerk. Okay, so, okay, the big one, the title character here is the project champion, okay? This is absolutely, fundamentally, you must have a project champion in every development project. It cannot be you. It has to be somebody within the organization that has hired you to do it. If you are an in-house developer, it still can't be you. It has to be somebody in the department that's primarily benefiting from the development project at hand, okay? And this has to be somebody who's willing to spend their political capital within the organization to see the project to a successful conclusion. More simply put, they've got to be willing to put their job on the line because they know it's beneficial, they know it's good for the company or the organization, and they are going to do what it takes to make sure it happens. So they go right up in the top corner there. You've got to spend a lot of time engaging your champion, but if you don't, you are in peril. I mean, if you think about it, if you've been hired to do a job that nobody cares about, nobody in the organization even cares about, it's almost certain to fail. Okay, the last personality type is the saboteur. Frankly, these are pretty rare, but this is somebody who, unlike a disparager, is just bringing up, contrarian views. This is somebody who's actively working toward the failure of the development project, okay? Now, they might use their internal clout to discredit people or discredit technology decisions, or a classic sort of sabotage method is withholding support, withholding information, not engaging, and they can strangle it. And I'll talk more about that in the following slides. Okay, so there's our matrix. So we're going to get into how to figure out who's who and then how to deal with them. I should say from here on out, photo unrelated. Basically, clip art, kind of, stock photography makes me want to shove a fork in my eye. So rather than having stupid stuff about roles and people and stick figures, I just put up some pictures that I thought were pretty. So don't try to make a connection. Okay, perceiving personalities and roles. This is mostly going to happen in meetings or in one-on-one conversations, but generally meetings are the best avenue for figuring out who's who. So you're going to get sick of this, but stop talking. When you're in meetings, when you're having discussions, stop talking and listen more. Because you're never going to get the political landscape of an organization if you don't shut up and pay attention. Okay, so when people are speaking and you're listening, it's not enough to be taking notes. You need to ask thoughtful questions. That does a couple of things. One, it forces you to really process what they're saying to you. It also reinforces relationships because the person that you're then asking the questions of knows that you care and knows that you're trying to understand their needs or their concerns. And if you can't think up a question, that's okay. At least paraphrase back to them what they said to you. It's a classic sales technique, but it's also a relationship building technique. Less people know, you're paying attention, okay? But listening to the words is really only about a third. You've got to look up from your computer, look up from your note-taking, and look at the body language of the people in the room, okay? If you think about it, most of us, take notes on a laptop, This posture I'm modeling here, that all the people who are listening on the recording are just wondering what I'm up to, that posture is very closed and it's very contained. And if you're furiously trying to get every word, you're missing more than half of the information. So look up. As people are speaking, is their gesture closed? Is it open? Are they furrowing their brow? Are they smiling? And also, at least as important, is if it's a meeting and there are other people in the room, look at how the other people are reacting to the person who's speaking. Look at their body language. That's going to tell you a lot about the dynamics between these folks and the power structure within the organization, and who's got clout and who doesn't, and who's taken seriously and who isn't. So you're listening, you're paying attention to body language, and the last one, just as important, is the tone. What is the tone the person is taking with you? The tone of voice is going to tell you if they're aggravated, if they're excited, and the tone that people take with each other, is also very, very telling. If it's a cooperative, they're ending, sentences with, sort of an up inflection as opposed to deadpanning it, that's going to tell you, how do these people, do they respect each other? How do they talk to each other? Okay, let me give you a good object lesson on why this really matters. I had a longtime client, and one of the main people who was part of the development process, one of the employees who was part of the development process, had a learning disability and I think some language processing issues. Now this person had a lot of insight, a great deal of experience in the organization, was very smart, but just tended to take about 15 to 25% longer to get an idea out, to speak an idea or have a conversation than most people, but it was always very worthwhile information. Now, I also had a subcontractor in this setting, and my subcontractor was an incredible seer. So the person who's speaking slowly starts to talk. The seer who's really like, I know where you're going with this, would cut off the client about less than halfway in. I know where you're going, I know what you want, and would launch into a few minutes of why you can or can't have what you're asking for. And I would have to, this was so embarrassing, but I would have to stop and almost chide my sub and say, please let our client finish. And the thing is, about a quarter of the time, the seer was super smart. That person knew exactly where the speaker was going most of the time, but about 25%, the client was going somewhere different, something that nobody else in the room had thought of, had perceived, and by cutting it off, losing very valuable information and damaging the project. So shut up, listen, pay attention to body language and tone. Okay, so if you've kind of figured out who's who, you've got to now cultivate your champions and cultivate the people who are making positive contributions to the project. So there are a few things that I think reinforce those relationships most effectively. First of all, yes, listening. Always listen. Okay, second, what I'm calling this acts of kindness, and it can be anything, but a good example is, suppose your champion has a little feature that they want in the system, and it's maybe not part of the spec, and it's maybe not the most important thing, but it's going to be helpful to them. It's not going to damage the budget. It's not going to damage delivery time. Do them a little act of kindness. Give them that little feature that they want, right? It's not hurting the project, and it's not hurting you much, but it's goodwill. It's saying, what you're giving me, I appreciate, and I'm willing to, go extra for you and give you this little feature. That builds goodwill, that builds trust, that builds kindness. So acts of kindness, when you can do something nice that you don't have to for your champion, you're reinforcing that relationship. Okay, advice and rulings. This is another very powerful technique for reinforcing positive relationships. As everybody knows, development is a lot of judgment calls. Every day as you're coding something, you're making judgment calls. There are always multiple ways to approach something. Okay, and most of the time, it's not hard to figure out, what the best approach is for the situation. But sometimes you need advice, or sometimes you might not even necessarily need advice, but you're like, this could really go either way, and I don't have a personal preference. Go to your champion, or go to the other supporters and say, I need your advice on this. Can I get a ruling? I've got a couple ways of doing it. Here's option A, here's option B. Which one do you like better? Okay, again, what are you doing? You're reinforcing that I trust your expertise. You're also, in the process, learning more about the organization for which you're working, because their background informs their decision of which way to go, and you're going to be able to use that in the future. But most importantly, you're again reinforcing the relationship, saying, I trust you and I need your guidance to make this better. And people feel really good when you come and ask them for advice. It's a great compliment. So advice and rulings, important. The last one is gifts, and maybe be careful should be bigger on the screen here, because depending on the project you're working in, giving a gift might not be ethical. It might be against the rules, particularly in like larger corporations. There are pretty strict rules about giving gifts, contractors giving gifts. And with governments and civil servants, it might be against the law. You might be violating corruption law, depending on where you live and what the rules are. So be super cautious. But if you are in a situation where you can give a gift, it's a great thing to do if you keep it appropriate. So it's got to be something small. If you give a very large or very expensive gift, it's going to make you look awkward and weird, basically. It's going to make you look desperate, okay? So small stuff. What I like to do, I'm a pretty good baker, so I like to make cookies. And I'll just bring cookies to meetings, and people get excited for it. And you would not believe the amount of goodwill you can get from something small like that. But if you don't bake, say you have a morning meeting, right? Call up your champion and say, hey, is it okay if I bring donuts to this meeting? And of course, they'll be like, yeah, bring donuts, of course. And so you say, great, okay, I'm going to show up with a couple dozen donuts. Hey, what's your favorite? Oh, I like the chocolate old-fashioned. Cool. So you show up the next morning. You've got a great big box of donuts for the hordes to devour. But in another bag, you've got a chocolate old-fashioned you've pulled aside for your champion. That is an extremely simple thing to do that costs you about 20 bucks. And again, the goodwill is enormous because you're showing this person, I care about you, I care about what you like, I want you to have the very donut you want, and you give it to them, and they go nuts. Okay, maybe they don't go nuts, but they appreciate it. And it reinforces the relationship, and it keeps a healthy, professional respect going with just these simple acts of kindness and gift giving. Another good object lesson, I had one year when I had my consulting firm, for end of the year gifts, thanks for your business this year, I cooked up 4 different kinds of cookies and put them in a nice pretty package, wrapped them up. Okay, one of those was some fortune cookies, and I made up silly, stupid little fortunes and stuck them in there. Well, I brought them to one of my clients, and the number 2 person in the company loved those fortune cookies. She absolutely loved them. And about every quarter or so, for years, for like 5 years, oh, those fortune cookies, you ever gonna make them again? I loved them so much, they were great. I got 5 years of goodwill and positive, relationship, healthy relationship with a company from a single batch of silly fortune cookies. So it really matters. I know this sounds like small stuff, but it can impact on a scope that's much bigger than it might seem. Oh, the last super important thing is don't give a gift that may look like it's a romantic overture, right? I know I shouldn't have to say it, but very important. It's not ethical to, hit on your clients. And even if you don't mean to, stop and think about what you're giving. The only person I know who successfully got away with it is my good friend Dave Knight. But first of all, Dave Knight has more charm in his pinky finger than most of us will have in our bodies, in our entire lives. And I have his assurances from his wife that he didn't really start making the moves on her until after the project was complete. So he did it right, but I'm just jealous of his charm. Dave says your mileage may vary. Okay, cool. So we know how to foster the positive relationships. What about those negative relationships? What about the ones that are problematic? Your detractors. Okay. Can you guess the first thing I'm going to say? You got to listen to them. You got to let them have a little bit of a say, and don't be adversarial, and don't cut them off early, but let them say what they need to say. And sometimes, I was going to say often, but really sometimes, if you treat them with respect, you'll get respect back. Sometimes it's just a personality thing. They don't like someone from the outside getting into their business. And once you have illustrated that you are coming from a place of pure intentions and a desire to make things better, they may just turn over, and they probably won't be your best friend and give you hugs, but at least they might not be a detractor. Okay, but If that's not working and you have someone who you're pretty sure is going to be, you're going to be butting heads with throughout the project, I like to sort of set a mental 5-minute timer and get into it with them, respectfully, diplomatically, but just, okay, you're not happy about this, tell me why. Okay, it's important to keep it to 5 minutes because sometimes people just want to go on and on and on and on, and they will keep you there for hours complaining. But it's also important because you need to control this conversation that you're invoking, okay? So you say, let's talk about it more. What's your objection? Why do you object? What has happened in the past within your organization? Have there been failed projects that you're worried about? What is your solution? Okay, if this is the case, how are we going to make it better? Stay on top of the conversation and make them justify their complaints diplomatically, okay? A few things are likely to come out of this. One is that they're going to panic when they're asked to come up with a solution and back down, right? Because sometimes people just want to complain and they haven't really thought about how they're going to be constructive. And sometimes just saying, give me a solution, or let's talk about how we're going to do it, they'll back down because it's really kind of just a bullying thing, okay? Another possibility, and this is great in meetings, is when you give them license to speak for an extended period of time, look at the other people in the room, okay? If they lean in, then this detractor probably has some valuable things to contribute. They're just not going about it in the most friendly way. If, and this happens I think more often in my experience, if the people in the room lean back in their chairs, if phones come out and eyes start rolling, what you've probably got is a blowhard. And this blowhard is probably already kind of contained within the cultural landscape, within the political landscape of the organization. And they may not be the threat that they seem to be. You've still got to go through it with them, and you still have to manage with them, but they might not be a big deal. Okay, and the last possibility is that you have a very determined detractor who's going to, really try to fight you every step of the way. Okay, in that case, when the 5 minutes runs out, say, thanks, we'll talk about this more later, and you go to your champion privately, or you go to a supportive manager privately and ask for assistance. Say, I'd like help in dealing with the concerns that this detractor person has. They're going to, first of all, they're going to know that person's reputation. They're going to know that person's MO. They're going to be able to give you guidance because you've got a nice, healthy relationship with your champion. They're going to give you guidance about how we're going to manage it. And they're going to work with you because you're working with people who want to make it better. They know this person's fighting against it. They might also know what good contributions that person can make. So by working as a team together, you can figure out a strategy for how to cope with a determined detractor. Okay, but what's really, really important, and I think very tempting to techies like ourselves, it's super important not to try to win them over with rhetoric, okay? Don't try to tell them how great it's going to be. For God's sake, don't tell them that this plugin you're going to license is going to be really awesome and it's going to make all their concerns go away. Okay, people don't care, and it can actually be damaging. And if you don't believe me that you can't win over people with rhetoric, there's a great website I've found. It's called Facebook, and look at some political arguments from wherever you live. People don't want rhetoric. You need to instead build a kick-ass system that shows them you're gonna make it. It's gonna be better than what they imagine, and it's not gonna have all these faults that they're thinking, right? Show them. Don't try to talk to them because it's only gonna strain the relationship. I have a great story about this. When I was a detractor, and it wasn't a development project, it was a plumbing project, but my good friend Spencer is a plumber and a really great guy. And a few plumbing issues had stacked up in my house. One of them was we needed a new kitchen faucet. Ours was gross and dirty and leaky. And so we go over to the kitchen, and I'm saying, I just need to get rid of this. And Spencer says, oh, okay, what you gotta do is get a Kohler K597 faucet. This thing is awesome, it's gonna change your life. And he goes on and on for like 10 minutes about how rad this faucet is. And he literally said, it's gonna change my life. And I'm just, dude, just shut up. I'll order whatever you want. I don't care. If water comes out and doesn't spray across to the stove, that's fine. Why are we talking about it? But he's too, excited and engaged. And he's telling me, he's got it, and he's telling me about all the different mutual friends we have for whom he's installed a K597. And I'm like, and I'm not being a good friend to him at this point, and I'm not really engaging. I'm like, fine, I'll order that thing, right? You don't need to talk about the technology with me. You don't need to get into the specifics. Just tell me what you need from me, it'll be fine. So here's the thing, he installed the K597 from Kohler. That thing changed my life. That is an awesome faucet. It comes down, but you can like pull out and it's like spray patterns and different stuff, and like everybody in the family loves that thing. So he was right, but he didn't need to try to convince me. I'd already hired him, I already trusted him. So when you're in that situation, don't try to win over somebody by saying how great it's gonna be. Just make it great, just actually deliver, and you're gonna have, I think, better outcomes. Okay, so the darkest of worse than a detractor is a saboteur. Okay, this is pretty rare. Just show of hands, has anyone like genuinely had somebody sabotage a project, like willfully sabotage a project? Okay, it's a little less rare than I thought. So it's important to know, but okay. It's relatively rare, so don't just jump to that conclusion when someone isn't being cooperative. You need to, when you sense that something's not right, you need to pay attention and look for, evidence that someone might be actively working against you, not just raising concerns or, being obstinate or being rude, but really taking steps to hurt the project. If you see that happen, do not confront that person, do not make accusations, go one-on-one with your project champion and very diplomatically say, I have a concern about this individual. And lay out to them in things that you can factually back up what has happened, what the concerns are, and let your champion guide you from there. Okay. A couple of things are likely to happen. They're either just going to take it on. They'll say, all right, I've seen this before, I'll deal with it. Or they might refer you to someone higher up. It might go as high as HR in a larger organization. But the thing is, it has to be dealt with by that person's employer. It can't be done by you, and you can't be like the superhero who flies in and unmasks the saboteur like it's the end of Scooby-Doo. It's not going to end well for you, and it's not going to end well for your project. So be diplomatic, share your concerns, let them handle it, okay? I had one incident where I had a genuine saboteur, and I didn't realize it till it was too late. I was working for, let's call it a major space agency, because I don't think I'm allowed to say that, what they really are. And it was a classic FileMaker story, right? We've got data in spreadsheets and Word documents and all over the place, and we have this quarterly report we have to do, and it's a pain in the butt every time, and it's taking time and money to do. Can you put it into a database that will give us aggregate information? Well, of course, piece of cake. Turns out that quarterly report was prepared by another contractor. Okay, this other contractor, the vision from the civil servants was that I was going to aggregate the information, build a system that she could just pull the aggregate information and work it into the report. It was a nice printed bound report that they would do every quarter. And it would be so much easier for her. Well, I said, okay, let me get you set up with FileMaker. Oh, well, I don't have FileMaker, and I'm not going to buy it. Okay, well, there's probably budget here in the project. I can just get you a copy. No, I'm not going to install it. Okay, well, what if I make it available to you on a web page? I'm not dialing into the VPN just for your report, right? Every step of the way. She was strangling it. She was withholding support and withholding information and just willfully refusing. Because, as I should have caught on very early, she was billing a lot of hours pulling all this crazy junk data together into something that was meaningful and usable. And yes, it was going to be cheaper and more efficient for the large space agency to have a system that did that for her, so she was really just aggregating the report. But she killed it. I didn't catch on in time, and she killed it. I didn't look good. I didn't come out looking good, and she was still, as far as I know, to this day, she's doing that report. And this was probably 10 years ago. So saboteurs can be real, and you've got to pay attention. But since you're listening and observing and hearing tone, you're not going to fall for that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on if things go off the rails here. I'm going to give you sort of my 3 main steps. But tomorrow afternoon, I think in this very room, Grand Canyon 6, there's a talk called Beyond Damage Control, where it's a whole hour of basically reversing bad client experiences. So I'd encourage you to check that out. I'm probably going to. But my tips are, first of all, if things do go off the rails, if you can't manage to keep it on track, first of all, own your share. We've all had projects. I don't want to, I actually refuse to count how many of my projects have gone bad, but it's a decent percentage. It's maybe, 10%. And it's never just one person's fault, right? And it's never been a situation where there was nothing I could have done leading up to the project becoming imperiled. So you've got a part in that, and it's important to own it, right? Now, it's also important not to be a martyr. Very early in my career, I had one experience where things were not going well, and a lot of it was just poor information, poor expectations from the client, but also I wasn't managing the client as well as I could have. And I decided, well, I know this is bad, but I'm going to make it all better. And I sort of had this grandiose vision of I'm going to swoop in and make everything right and work for 48 hours straight to make it all better. And it didn't really fix it, and I didn't come out looking like the savior that I thought I was going to. And frankly, you can't fix a problem that isn't just your problem. The problem also involved the client. So we had to find a way. So own your part, but don't be a martyr. And then there's going to be a reckoning. Whenever there's a serious problem, there's always going to be a reckoning, whether it's a phone call or a meeting. So you need to go into that reckoning with one of 2 things. Either a plan with specifics for how you propose to get things back on track and come out with a successful project, or an exit strategy for how you're going to leave the project. And if you are a contract developer, you do have a clause in your agreements that allows you to terminate, right? I hope you do, because you could be in serious trouble. So that's all I'm going to say about things going off the rails. Check out tomorrow's session. It's called Beyond Damage Control. It's here at 1 o'clock. Cool. OK, I'm going to have time left over for discussion. I'm so happy. But OK, quickly, the summary. So what did we talk about? We're going to come at things with constructive and pure motivations. You're going to be in it for the success of the client, for the success of the project. And by doing that well, you're going to look very good. And you're not only going to get paid, but you're going to have better, I think, satisfaction overall with your performance. The next thing is we're going to get there by observing the stakeholders, not just listening, but observing, looking at the tone, looking at how they interact with each other, and sort of figuring out what the power structure is, who's on your side and who's not, okay? You're going to stop talking, right? You guys have been talking this whole time, and I've been trying to present. I'm kidding. But stop talking and listen, right? And the last thing is, everything you do, approach it with integrability. Approach it with an inability to speak on stage in front of several people. Take 2. Whatever you do, approach it with integrity and with a sense of responsibility. And if you just heard that and said, well, why does he even need to say that? You're in good shape. I'm not worried about you. If, on the other hand, you said, well, why do I have to be responsible all the time to yourself? Then maybe there's some self-reflection in your future. OK, that's the end of my thing. I have one thing to pitch, which is more on this theme if you want to get better about relationships with clients. And that is Adam Aronson's presentation, which is also in this room at 10:30 tomorrow. Now, it's called Leveraging Customer Relationships to Increase Sales. And even if you don't really need to increase sales, Adam is a master of building and maintaining good relationships. I actually worked for his company for a couple of years, and I've seen him in action. He is an expert, and he's going to have all sorts of good information. So if this is something you want to continue to work on in your own professional development, I'd recommend checking that out for sure. OK, I'm going to do the rest of the slides, and then we'll do discussions and questions if you have any. Stuart@crookedarm.com is my email address if you want to ask me questions or talk to me about it offline or whatever. That's the best way to reach me. Crooked Arm Consulting no longer exists, but I'm resigned to having that email address for the rest of my life, so you can catch me there. Or you can just catch me in the halls walking around if you want to discuss more after we run out of time here. As far as I know, human nature isn't changing faster than technology, so I don't anticipate updating my slideshow. I uploaded, if you downloaded the PDF from the session site before about 6 p.m. last night, then there's a slightly revised newer one there, but not fundamentally different. So no updates. And of course, please tell them just how awful I was at filemaker.com/devcon/evaluations so that they can prevent me from coming back next year. Cool, okay, so that's it for my slides. So first of all, thank you for coming. If you want to leave, that's totally cool with me. If you want to discuss more, there's a microphone right here in the aisleway. And so if you have a question or a comment or discussion, please use that microphone. This is being recorded for posterity, so we want to be able to hear your questions. So that is it. You have my thanks. My pleasure. And nobody wants to talk. So naive. Oh, yes, sir.
Well, I have one question.
Yes.
The information you provided is both valuable and somewhat obvious in some ways.
For sure.
The challenge I think our company has is that virtually all of our customers we've never met, in that we build fairly complex solutions, but they're all over the country, and in fact all over the world.
Yep.
And our relationship is phone-based.
Okay.
And a lot of the information you provided assumes an in-person relationship. So I wonder if you'd comment a little bit about that.
Sure. And I have done a lot of remote work. If you can get people to do video conferencing, even if it's just like a check-in every other week, you can get most of that, body language information that you're missing out through the phone. In terms of coping with the inability to be face-to-face, I would say one, when you're having conversations and you are able to pay attention to the tone that you're hearing, and that's going to give you a lot of info. So I would say ask more questions. That's what I end up having to do, is ask more questions than I might otherwise. And even if, and this is for email too, and really, I worked in tech support for a long time, and I genuinely hate picking up the phone. I absolutely despise talking on the phone. So I tend to do a lot of stuff over email, which puts me at a disadvantage in dealing with people, because now you're not getting tone, you're not getting body language, you're only getting text, and it's very hard sometimes to glean what the undercurrent is, what the undertone and what's between the lines of that text. So really, I guess one just has to engage more and step up the level of conversation and the frequency of conversation if you're sensing trouble or if relationships seem strained. And you can totally mail cookies. What I do is I freeze them first, and then I put them in the mail right out of the freezer the next day, and they come pretty fresh. So, you can still give gifts, was my point there, really. You can still do nice things, even if you can't be in that physical space. But it's going to be harder. You're going to have to ask more questions and request clarification more often, and don't make assumptions about what you're hearing or what you're seeing in email. If there's any ambiguity, get it right. The one thing that sends more projects off the rails than anything else is misaligned expectations, and that happens when people don't get clarification. So I hope that's helpful to you. I realize, yeah. And when the other thing is, you did say, yeah, a lot of this does seem pretty obvious, and it is, but often, first of all, to the tech-headed, I just want to do scripts and calcs, I'm just happy, or designing something, right? That's what I'm super happy with. And it's easy to just lose sight of the obvious sometimes, or I need to get all the information that this person is telling me over the phone or in the meeting or whatever, and not look up and not think about those subtexts of those conversations. So yeah, I totally appreciate it. It does seem pretty obvious, but hopefully, it helps at least put names on things that people already had a sense of, if not be totally novel information to the folks who are hearing it. So thanks for your comment. Yes, my good man.
Hey, Stuart, thanks for the talk. Helpful.
My pleasure.
I have a confession to make, and I think you might have an interesting response.
Okay.
Because I think that, yes, some of your advice maybe is obvious, but that doesn't mean it's easy to take. So I'm really good with people one-on-one, very intuitive, read them really well, establish a rapport because it's just natural to me. But I'm terrible in meetings. You know, people are different. We have different skills and even abilities to engage.
Yeah.
And for years, I've really been working on this. I'm conscious of it as something. But I know people who go into meetings. I worked at UCSF for a long time where there were endless meetings. And there were people who went to every meeting with curiosity and interest about who the people in the room would be and how they responded to each other. And I was just like, you know, with my fingernails on the
holding on for dear life.
The board tables there, I'm just going to stay awake and get something out of this thing. So how do you respond to that?
That's a good, yeah, that's tricky. And it's important to, know thyself as you're doing. And I would say pick out, if this doesn't come naturally to you, pick out one thing at a time to work on. So the next time you go into a meeting, one thing I always do with meetings to this day is I actually don't use a laptop. I use pen and paper. And cognitively, it's easier to span the note-taking and the perception by doing hand on paper, pen on paper, than it is with a screen and a keyboard. The computer demands more of your engagement than writing tends to cognitively. In my experience and with folks who I've talked to about it, I haven't heard a lot of people feel otherwise. Certainly some people must, but that's one suggestion, just to make it a little easier to get your notes, but also be present in the meeting. But also pick a thing, right? So if you know that it's going to be too much stimulation to try to observe all three, the words, the body language, the tone, and look at how people are talking to the guy who's talking, whatever, then pick one thing. So say, for the next month or so, I'm going to make a conscious effort just to look at the people talking to the person who's speaking. Sorry, look at people looking at the person speaking, right? Or I'm going to, if you're doing video conferencing, I'm going to, make an effort just to really hear their tone and make sure that I'm getting any contextual information that they're conveying to me through the tone. I'm not going to worry about body language right now, right? I'm not going to worry about changing my note-taking, but pick one thing. And after a while, it'll become more natural, I think, and you'll get better at it. And then you might say, okay, I'm okay with this, so I'm going to add trying to perceive body language now, and build up to it. The other thing is, as an ADD afflicted myself, find a doctor, talk to a doctor, get a diagnosis. I'm quite sincere about this. That's what I had to do. I wasn't diagnosed with ADD until I was in my mid-30s, but as soon as a psychiatrist actually said, I've evaluated you, you do have ADD, inattentive type, and we're going to look at ways to help you with that through cognitive behavioral therapy and medication, I became a whole lot more effective in my job and in my life overall. And it brought a whole lot of things into focus for my entire life up to that point. So I'm not trying to sell drugs to you guys. I know that's kind of what it sounds like I'm driving at. But if you feel this is an affliction you may have, totally talk to a doctor, because it can make things a lot better if you get appropriate diagnosis and treatment. So that's just my little side bit. Thank you, Mark. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the Kohler 597.
Uh-huh.
Is it really worth $100 more than the 596? I don't
Okay.
really have a question.
It's an inch taller and comes out an inch further than the 596. And he actually told me to get the 596, but no one had it. No, they had it in stock, but it was $100 more to get the bigger one than the smaller one. I'm like, I'm already spending a lot of money on this, water heater, so I got the 597. But it's totally awesome. I know it's so silly, but yeah, because it has this little thing that comes out. You can change the spray pattern, so getting the sink clean, the basin all sprayed down is way easier. Yeah, the folks at FileMaker Inc. are going to love that. Okay, Mr. Knight.
One point to Mark that I would just suggest is partnering with somebody, having somebody in the room that's going to be that really great note taker so that you can be that engaging person to keep the eye contact and read the tone and all that. So we do that all the time because like Stuart said, it's really hard to capture and then to also engage and pull those questions out. So I love having somebody who's a really great note taker working with me, and whether that's in the team or on our team, it can be really effective. Stuart,
Yes.
your graph of the different personality types, my question to you is, do you ever actually share that with one of the primaries at a company to go, these are the kinds of people that we engage, and I like these kind of people up here, and let them sort of help you select who those, or identify who those helpful people might be, and maybe who some of those detractors might be?
Interesting thought. I developed this for this very talk. So over the spring, as I was trying to think about how to frame the discussion today, I developed that matrix. So I've never used it in a development setting, and it actually hadn't occurred to me till you brought it up. But I think know the client that you're bringing that to, and make sure that they're going to take it in the spirit presented. Because some people might see that and be like, dude, Machiavelli, chill out, right? We don't want somebody this conniving, right? And that's not how you're coming at it, but I can easily see how it might be perceived as such, as a manipulation tool, a raw manipulation tool, as opposed to a tool for better outcomes. So, but it's in the PDF now, so you can take it and do whatever you want with it. Thank you. Do you have something? No. Yeah, that was great. And for the recording, the comment was, when you're dealing with an organization that is doing one of their first or one of their very first development efforts, it can be helpful to introduce them to the different roles and the different personality types that pop up, so that at least give them an inkling of what could be happening, so that if something comes up, you can then go to your champion or go to another supporter and say, okay, as I alluded to in the past, I've seen this before, and I have some techniques for how we can diplomatically and appropriately deal with this particular situation and remedy whatever the hiccup might be. So yeah, excellent thought. Yeah. Anybody else? Oh.
Have you tried, instead of taking notes, use some kind of voice recording device?
Yeah, I've done that.
Plus and minuses of this.
I'm sorry, say that last thing again?
Pluses and minuses of this.
Pluses and minuses, yes. When I was consulting a lot, I had a pen, Evernote pen, I think it's, no, not Evernote. I can't remember what it's, LiveScribe. I got it, okay. I had a pen from a company called LiveScribe that would record the audio in the room, and as you take notes, it would save that file and sync it with the notes. You'd have to write notes on special paper, right? But then you could go back to your notes, and you could hear what was being said at the time you were recording those notes. Now, the pluses and minuses of that, first of all, it's really important to get permission to record the conversation. Whether or not it's legally required where you are, it is ethically required wherever you are. People have a right to know and to object if they're being recorded or not. So sometimes, even if you've invested in this kind of thing, they're not going to allow you to do it. And that's their prerogative, and it's not necessarily because they have nefarious reasons for not allowing you to record, but often people are simply not comfortable with it. But it is a fantastic resource if you're allowed to do it, and you're in a situation where either the client is new to you and you don't have a lot of experience and trust, or you're concerned that somebody's going to lie. I was trying to think of a more diplomatic way to put it. But you're concerned that at some point, somebody's going to say, I never told you to build this, I'm not going to pay for it, right? You can, it's not aggressive or anything. You can just say, let's go back to that conversation, because that's what I recall. So let's listen to it together and see where these expectations kind of went askew. And I don't think I ever really had to do that, but with the clients who would let me record the conversations, I also got a lot less sort of, back chat from people who were apt to kind of pull that sort of oh, I never said that thing. People are less likely to do that because they know there's a documentation of the discussion. So overall, I think it's a very good thing, but you just have to be careful about it and have to have permission. So yeah, thank you. Yes, sir.
So our company sells a vertical, so we're really not doing custom development, but I've been in hundreds of sites on sales calls and visits.
Yep.
And so just a couple things that I would encourage everyone. Number one, for you, get on an airplane and go. I mean, once you've done your first initial call to evaluate the overall scope of the project, that $500-600 you'll spend by going there might save you tens of thousands of dollars in the long run with pain and heartache. And to his point in his presentation, you can read things about people, their body language and things like that in the midst of them that you just can't pick up online. And often that saboteur or that dissenter, whatever you classified them as, it's odd, but they'll follow you to the water fountain, to the coffee machine, whatever, and they will slip you information about what's going on in the dynamic of the room that you just can't figure out on your own. So the ones that are champions that want that to succeed, they'll inform you of that information. As far as your situation, you know, where you get a little lost in the room, you have to know what your objective is at the start of that, in that meeting. And so envision what the most optimal outcome is for your company and for you. And then go into every meeting with an outline of the points that you want to discuss, you know, and then start with that. And it doesn't have to be a big list, but maybe 5 points that you want to go through. And as far as controlling saboteurs as well, or controlling dissenters, one thing I've found when you're in a group of people in a setting, just take a moment to go around and ask different ones what they hope the system to accomplish for them. If you can get them to kind of volunteer information and commit to being part of the process, and they'll say, well, if it would do this for me, that would be great. It's hard for them to back away from those comments. They've made a verbal commitment in front of a group of people about what it is they hope that you can do for them. And so therefore, it's hard for them to move back away from that and walk those comments back if you tell them, yes, and we can do those things for you. So it kind of turns a potential saboteur into it slides them a little more toward the champion category.
Thank you. Yeah, very valuable insights. And it makes me think when I had my saboteur at the large space agency, if early in a meeting I had just said with the civil servants right there to this person who became the saboteur, how do you feel about this initiative? That could have changed the entire process, the entire outcome. So thanks for those insights.
Really short because we got to go, but I think going into a meeting, visualizing the very best outcome is a really powerful way of proceeding. And also going in with an agenda in your mind, it might actually be quite formal, but what you need to accomplish and the steps to get there, and at least share with them, you know, how vaguely the meeting will proceed, giving enough latitude for unexpected things to happen. But the other thing, just to, I always minute my meetings, and it's relationship building. So, and it also prevents weird stuff from happening later when they say, no, we discussed this and agreed, because at the end of your minutes you say, please, if I've omitted anything, please let me know.
Yes.
And if you send out the minutes politely and respectfully, it's a really strong relationship building tool.
Very powerful. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great technique. And also, you know, going into discussions and meetings, this is hard for me because I tend to be pretty conflict averse. But if you can go into any sort of setting, interpersonal setting, prepared to take control of that conversation if need be, even if you don't want to, that can save awkward meetings and awkward discussions if you've thought about it in advance, like you said. Envision the best outcome and be prepared to take some control of that discussion to point it in that direction. That's very powerful stuff. It is not easy for my personality type, but it's very worthwhile. Yeah. I think we are out of time. So thanks for coming. I'll be around next couple of days. Thanks for applauding. Gosh, you're so sweet.